Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into the core ideas from the Almanack of Naval Ravikant.
Thinking about building a fulfilling life.
Yeah, exactly.
This isn't just going to be a summary, right? It's our take on the really actionable stuff from his tweets, his essays, interviews.
Yeah.
Kind of your shortcut to grasping how he thinks about wealth, happiness, and, making better judgments.
That's right. We've really spent some time with the Almanac. Tim Ferriss calls it a look at Naval's mental operating system, which I think is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And our goal here is to pull out those key principles, the ones you can start thinking about, maybe even applying straight away, focusing on how he frames wealth creation, the skill of judgment, which is often overlooked, and maybe some surprising ways to think about happiness. We're aiming for those aha moments,
Yeah.
without the info dump feel.
Okay, perfect. Let's unpack it then, starting with something really fundamental. Wealth. Naval's big line is seek wealth, not money or status. Now, these things feel connected, don't they? What's the crucial distinction for him? Well, what's really insightful, I think, is how he separates them based on their impact. So wealth for him is assets that earn while you sleep. Businesses, investments, that kind of thing.
Right. Passive income, basically.
Sort of, yeah. Money is just the transfer medium, how we swap value. And status. Well, that's just the social hierarchy game. Where do you rank?
Okay.
And Naval really warns against getting caught up in that status game. He argues building wealth gives you something way more valuable: freedom, autonomy.
Freedom. Meaning?
Freedom from needing to constantly sell your time. It's not about the flashy stuff. It's about having real choices about how you spend your life. That's the wealth he's talking about.
Gotcha. And those status games.
Mm.
He definitely says avoid them. Why is that so central?
Well, if you think about it, status games are often zero-sum, right? For you to go up, someone else maybe has to go down. Naval points out that people playing those games can actually end up trying to pull down people who are genuinely creating things, building wealth. It's a total distraction from building assets that actually grow the pie for everyone. Wealth creation can be positive sum.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Shifting from competing to creating. And a huge part of his wealth idea is getting away from just trading hours for dollars, the standard job model.
Oh, absolutely. He's very clear. You're not going to get rich renting out your time. There's just a limit, a ceiling on what you can earn that way.
Because there are only so many hours in the day.
Exactly. The real shift happens with ownership, equity, having a piece of a business, owning assets. That's how you unlock wealth that works for you 24/7, not just when you're clocked in.
Okay, so if we want to build that kind of wealth, not just income, what are the building blocks? What does Naval say are the essentials?
He boils it down to 3 core things: specific knowledge, accountability, and leverage. These are like the legs of the stool for wealth creation.
Specific knowledge, accountability, leverage.
Okay. Yeah, and we can dig into each one, but it's really how they work together that's the magic.
Let's start with specific knowledge. It sounds, specific.
Yeah.
But it's not just stuff you learn from a textbook, is it?
No, definitely not. And that's the key point. Specific knowledge, the way Naval talks about it, is stuff you almost can't be trained for in a formal classroom setting.
Really? How so?
Because if it can be easily taught, then lots of people can learn it, and it becomes a commodity. You're competing on price, basically. Specific knowledge often comes from just following your genuine, maybe even obsessive curiosity, your passions.
Ah, okay.
It's that thing, he says, that feels like play to you, but maybe looks like really hard work to other people watching you do it.
That's a great phrase. Feels like play, looks like work. Can you give some examples? What does that look like in the real world?
Sure. Think about someone who's just naturally amazing at sales. They connect, they persuade, it just clicks for them. Or, a musician who seems to just get music instinctively. It could even be someone totally obsessed with, say, ancient history or complex board games, or reading every sci-fi novel ever written. That deep dive, that passion, builds a unique understanding, maybe pattern recognition that others don't have. It could be intuition about game theory or just being really good at observing people.
So it's much more about these innate talents or deep-seated interests than formal training. He also talks about escaping competition through authenticity. How does that link up?
That's such a powerful idea. His point is, if you're trying to be like someone else, doing what they do, you're automatically competing.
Right. Direct competition.
But nobody else has your unique blend of talents, your background, your specific experiences, your particular obsessions. That combination is your authenticity. And if you build your work, your career, whatever, around that unique combination, well, who can compete with you at being you?
Nobody can beat you at being you.
Exactly. It becomes your unfair advantage. Think of a really unique artist or writer. You can't just copy them effectively because their work comes from who they are.
And the internet must be a massive enabler for this authentic, specific knowledge.
Oh, absolutely huge. The internet lets you find your audience, your people, no matter how niche your specific knowledge is. You can build a business, create value, just by sharing your unique perspective with the world. It offers incredible scale for that authenticity.
Okay, so that's specific knowledge.
Mhm.
The second pillar you mentioned was leverage. What does Naval mean by leverage?
Leverage is basically a force multiplier. It amplifies the impact of your judgment and your specific knowledge. He talks about three main types.
Okay.
First, there's capital, money, using money to make more money. But to get access to significant capital to leverage, you usually need to have demonstrated good judgment and accountability already.
Makes sense. You need a track record.
Right. Second is labor, managing people. This is the oldest kind of leverage, getting work done through others, but it has limits in scalability and honestly comes with headaches.
Managing people is hard.
It is. And the third type, which he sees as the most powerful and democratic today, is products with no marginal cost of replication.
Meaning?
Things like code and media, software, apps, books, podcasts, videos, music. Once you create it, you can distribute it to millions, potentially billions, for virtually zero extra cost per copy.
Oh, okay. Scalability.
Massive scalability. And code, like software, is especially powerful because it's often permissionless. You don't need anyone's approval to start building something potentially huge with just a laptop.
So comparing those types, capital, labor, code media, is one better than the other?
Well, capital is great if you have the judgment to deploy it. Labor is often necessary but complex. But Naval really emphasizes the power of code and media because of that near infinite scalability and democratic access. That's where you can get exponential returns.
And he talks about combining these things, right? Like specific knowledge with leverage.
Yes, exactly. He gives an example like, imagine someone who deeply understands both real estate, that's specific knowledge, and software development, another kind of specific knowledge, plus the ability to create code leverage. That person could build something like a Zillow or a Redfin, right? A tech platform that disrupts traditional real estate. They're combining specific domain knowledge with the massive leverage of code and media to reach millions. Much more powerful than just being a traditional broker.
Got it. And this ties back to judgment, because he says leverage amplifies judgment. Why is that link so critical?
Because if you have a lot of leverage, maybe you manage a big team or control a lot of capital or have software used by millions, your decisions have vastly bigger consequences.
Right, the stakes are higher.
Much higher. A small improvement in your judgment, a slightly better decision, can lead to huge positive outcomes when multiplied by that leverage. Conversely, a small error in judgment can cause massive damage. This is why he stresses that judgment becomes increasingly important as you gain leverage.
Which leads us perfectly into the third pillar, judgment itself. Naval calls it an underrated skill. Why do you think he feels it's underrated?
Well, I think we tend to glorify hard work, hustle culture,
Yeah.
You can work incredibly hard going in the completely wrong direction.
True. Wasted effort.
Exactly. Judgment is about figuring out the right direction to apply that effort. In a world overflowing with information and opportunity, knowing what to do, and maybe more importantly, what not to do, is incredibly valuable, perhaps more valuable than just sheer effort.
He makes a distinction between wisdom and judgment, too, doesn't he? How does he separate those?
Yeah, it's a useful distinction. He defines wisdom as knowing the long-term consequences of your actions, understanding the second and third order effects.
Okay, seeing the bigger picture over time.
Right. And judgment, then, is applying that wisdom in the moment, using that understanding of long-term effects to make good decisions now. Wisdom is the knowing, judgment is the doing based on that knowing.
So how do we get better at judgment? Is it just about getting older and having more experience?
Experience definitely helps, you can't deny that, but Naval argues you can actually speed up the development of judgment. You can build a foundation by actively studying fundamental disciplines. He recommends things like microeconomics, game theory, understanding incentives, and strategic interactions. Also psychology, persuasion, ethics, math, and computer science. These give you mental
And
models.
mental models, frameworks for thinking.
Exactly. Tools to understand how systems work, how people behave, how to reason effectively. They provide a bedrock for making better calls, even without decades of direct experience in a specific field.
He also talks a lot about clear thinking being the foundation. What does he mean by clear thinking?
Clear thinking for naval is about really understanding things at a fundamental level. Basics first. Can you explain a complex idea very simply, like to a child?
The Feynman technique, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. If you can't break it down and build it back up from first principles, you probably don't understand it deeply enough. You might just be repeating something you heard. True understanding allows for clarity.
And this clarity requires facing reality, he says, getting rid of biases and ego.
Yes, that's a huge part of it. We all have wishful thinking, biases, ego defenses that cloud our perception. Good judgment demands seeing things as they are, not how we wish they were or how we think they should be. He even says suffering can be a clarifying force because it strips away illusions. It forces you to confront what's real.
That's intense.
Yeah.
But it makes sense that wishful thinking is the enemy of good decisions. He also mentions something counterintuitive, the value of boredom and solitude.
Right. In our hyper-connected, always-on world, he champions carving out unscheduled time. Time just to think, to be bored, to let your mind wander.
Why is boredom good?
Because it's often in those quiet, reflective moments, free from constant input, that the best ideas surface. You connect dots, you have insights. Constant busyness crowds out that deep thinking needed for good judgment.
Okay, that's a good reminder for all of us, I think. He also gives some practical shortcuts, heuristics for decision-making. What are some of those?
Yeah, these are really useful. One big one, especially for major life decisions, career, relationships, etc., is if you can't decide, the answer is no.
Why no?
His logic is that the world offers so many opportunities now. You should only commit to the things you feel a clear, enthusiastic yes about. If it's a 50-50 struggle, let it go. Wait for the clearer yes.
Interesting. What else?
Another is the run uphill heuristic. If you have two choices and they seem roughly equal, pick the one that's more difficult or painful in the short term.
Why choose pain?
Because short-term pain often leads to long-term gain. The harder path now might build more resilience, more skills, better foundations for the future. Think exercise versus sitting on the couch.
Got it. Any others?
Yes, inversion. It's a classic mental model. Charlie Munger talks about it too. Instead of asking, how can I succeed? Ask, what are all the ways I could fail? And then actively avoid those things. Focus on eliminating the downside rather than just predicting the upside.
Avoid stupidity rather than seeking brilliance.
Exactly. It's often easier and more effective.
Wow, okay. So we've covered specific knowledge, leverage, and judgment, the core pillars for wealth creation in Naval's view. That's already a lot to chew on.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you see how interconnected they are, right? You need that specific knowledge, you amplify it with leverage, but the whole thing hinges on having sound judgment to steer it correctly. Without judgment, specific knowledge is wasted and leverage becomes dangerous.
Absolutely. So for you listening, the takeaway isn't just about money. It's about building this foundation, your unique knowledge, understanding how to amplify your efforts ethically and critically, honing that ability to think clearly and make wise choices.
Yeah, it's a framework for effectiveness, really, which, as we'll get into, also ties into finding happiness and taking responsibility for your own life. It's all part of the same integrated system he describes.
Right. So maybe take a moment to think, where are you on developing your specific knowledge? Are you consciously looking for leverage? And how are you actively working on improving your judgment? These seem like the foundational questions from this part of the Almanac.
Definitely. Now, building on that foundation of judgment and clear thinking, Naval talks a lot about mental models and the process of learning itself. How does he approach that?
He sees the brain as fundamentally a memory prediction machine. It's constantly trying to predict the future based on past experiences. But he emphasizes that relying just on specific past events isn't as effective as understanding underlying principles or mental models.
Right, because principles are more transferable, aren't they? A specific event might not repeat, but the underlying principle like supply and demand or evolution applies in many different situations.
Exactly. So he suggests actively learning key mental models. He mentions things like evolution, obviously, game theory again, and drawing insights from thinkers like Charlie Munger, Nassim Taleb, Benjamin Franklin. building a toolkit of these fundamental concepts.
And a big part of acquiring these models, for him, is reading. He's huge on reading.
Oh, yeah. But he has a specific approach, doesn't he? It's
Right.
not about just finishing books cover to cover.
No, not at all. He advocates developing a genuine love for reading first. His advice is basically, read what you love until you love to read. Don't force yourself through books you hate just because you feel you should.
Find your genre, find your authors.
Exactly. And then especially with nonfiction, don't feel obligated to finish everything. Skim, jump around, read fast, stop when you feel you've grasped the core concept the author is trying to convey. Extract the wisdom. Don't just tick a box saying you read it.
It's about understanding, not completion. That's quite liberating, actually.
It is, and prioritize foundational knowledge. He really pushes science, mathematics, the basics, things that have stood the test of time. Older knowledge for timeless problems is often more robust than the latest fad.
Okay, so learn fundamental principles, read widely but strategically, focus on understanding. This all feeds back into building better judgment. Now, let's pivot slightly to happiness. This is another major theme. How does Naval view happiness? Is it just luck?
Not at all. This is maybe one of his most countercultural points. He argues very strongly that happiness is learned. It's a skill.
A skill, like learning to code or play the piano.
Exactly like that. He compares it to fitness. You wouldn't expect to be physically fit without working out, right? Similarly, you shouldn't expect to be happy without actively cultivating the skill of happiness.
So it's a choice we make.
It's a choice, yes, and a skill you develop through practice. He believes the mind is malleable. You can train yourself to be happier. It's not solely dependent on external circumstances.
That challenges the common idea of, I'll be happy when.
Right?
Right. When I get the job, the house, the relationship.
Totally. He calls that the delusion of I'll be happy when, because the external goalposts always shift. Once you achieve one thing, your desire just latches on to the next. True happiness, he argues, has to be internal. It's about your default state when you're not chasing something.
How do we cultivate that internal state then? What are the practical steps?
A big part is presence. Reducing that constant mental chatter, the mind jumping to the past or worrying about the future. He talks about minimizing nexting, always thinking about what's next instead of experiencing what's now.
Being here now. Mindfulness, essentially.
Yeah, very much aligned with mindfulness and meditation concepts. He also points out things that actively destroy happiness. Envy is a big one he highlights.
Envy. Why envy specifically?
Because comparison is the thief of joy, right? Envy forces you into playing someone else's game, measuring yourself by their metrics. He advises focusing on your own single-player game. Run your own race.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about habits? Does he link happiness to specific habits?
Absolutely. He sees happiness as being built by habits, both things you do and things you avoid. He personally avoids things like alcohol, limits social media, tries to avoid excessive news consumption.
Things that create mental noise or negative states.
Exactly. And proactively choosing your environment and social circle is key too.
Mhm.
He mentions the 5 chimps theory. You become like the 5 people you spend the most time with. So choose positive, supportive people.
Choose your tribe wisely. He also talks about acceptance, doesn't he? As a route to peace, if not outright happiness.
Yes, this is crucial. He frames it as, for any situation you don't like, you basically have 3 options. Change it, accept it, or leave it.
Change it, accept it, or leave it.
Right. What causes misery is trying to do none of those, just wishing it were different while staying stuck. Resisting reality, being averse to what is a primary source of suffering. Acceptance, even of difficult things you can't change, brings peace.
And he even touches on bigger philosophical ideas, like legacy.
Yeah, he suggests the desire for a lasting legacy can be another source of unhappiness. Accepting our impermanence, the fact that everything eventually fades, can actually be quite freeing. It allows you to focus on living well now.
Okay, so happiness is an internal skill built through presence, habits, managing envy, acceptance, and choosing your environment. That's a very proactive view.
It really is. It puts the power squarely back in your hands, which leads nicely into his ideas about saving yourself.
Saving yourself. What does he mean by that? Taking responsibility.
Exactly. Radical responsibility. Ultimately, Naval says no one is coming to save you. You are responsible for your own well-being, your health, your knowledge, your mental state, your wealth, your fitness. It's all on you.
That sounds harsh, but also empowering, maybe.
I think it's meant to be empowering. It starts with choosing to be authentically yourself, tying back to specific knowledge. No one can compete with you on being you. Stop trying to emulate others and lean into your unique capabilities.
Okay, be yourself. What else?
Choose to care for yourself. Recognize the mismatch between our evolutionary wiring and the modern world. We're wired for scarcity but live in abundance. We're wired for tribes but live in hyper-connected anonymity. Our phones constantly hijack our attention.
So we need to consciously make choices that go against our primal urges sometimes.
Yes, he uses the quote, "Easy choices, hard life. Hard choices, easy life." Choosing the discomfort of exercise over the ease of the couch. Choosing to focus instead of constantly checking notifications. These hard choices build a better long-term reality.
He mentions meditation here too, right? As a tool for self-care.
Yeah, he calls meditation intermittent fasting for the mind, a way to deliberately quiet the mental chatter, increase awareness, and gain control over your internal state.
Choosing to build yourself is another aspect. Through habits.
Definitely. The power of habits is immense. He stresses being impatient with your actions, get started now, but patient with the results. Compounding takes time. Focus on building good systems, not just setting lofty goals. Create an environment where good habits are easier.
And choosing to grow yourself through continuous learning.
Yes, always learning, sticking to the fundamentals we talked about earlier, building that solid foundation of understanding.
Finally, he talks about choosing to free yourself. What kind of freedom is he referring to? Not just financial freedom.
No, primarily internal freedom. Freedom from, rather than just freedom to. Freedom from anger, freedom from uncontrolled reactions, freedom from negative emotions, freedom from the expectations others place on you.
How do you achieve that internal freedom?
By letting go of things you can't control. Recognizing anger, for instance, as a loss of control, as a form of self-punishment. Breaking the habit of letting your mind run wild with uncontrolled, often negative thoughts. It's about mastering your internal state.
So radical responsibility, authenticity, self-care through hard choices, building habits, continuous growth, and seeking internal freedom. That's quite a manifesto for saving yourself.
It really is. It's a call to take complete ownership of your life's trajectory, internally and externally.
Okay, that brings us towards the end, towards philosophy, meaning, and values. How does Naval approach these really big questions? Does he offer answers?
Interestingly, he emphasizes the question more than providing a specific answer about the meaning of life. He believes you have to find your own answer. It's a deeply personal journey.
So, no single prescription for meaning.
No. He even entertains the possibility that there might be no inherent grand meaning, especially when you consider the vastness of cosmic time and the eventual heat death of the universe.
That sounds potentially bleak.
It could, but he also offers a scientific perspective.
Ah.
Life is a force that locally reverses entropy, creating order from chaos. Perhaps, he muses, life's purpose in that sense is to accelerate the universe towards its end state, towards eventual oneness. But again, it's more of a thought experiment than a definitive answer.
So the search is personal. But what about values? Does he stress the importance of living by specific values?
Absolutely. He stresses the importance of identifying your core values and then actually living by them consistently. He gives personal examples like valuing honesty, valuing long-term pure relationships over short-term gains, consciously deciding not to hold on to anger. Your values become your internal compass.
And he seems to lean towards a sort of practical, rational philosophy.
Yeah, he sometimes refers to it as rational Buddhism, taking the practical insights about managing the mind, reducing suffering, focusing on the internal state, maybe without all the dogma or metaphysics, very focused on the here and now.
The present moment comes up again.
Constantly. The past is gone, the future isn't here yet. The present moment is literally all we ever have access to. Learning to inhabit it fully is key to both happiness and effectiveness.
Okay, so to wrap this incredible deep dive into the Almanack up,
Yeah.
what are the absolute core takeaways we want people to walk away with?
I think it boils down to a few key things. 1, build wealth ethically by leveraging your specific knowledge with accountability and, crucially, good judgment.
2,
2, happiness isn't found externally. It's an internal skill you cultivate through presence, deliberate habits, acceptance, and managing things like envy. It's a choice.
okay?
3, take radical responsibility for yourself. Your health, wealth, knowledge, happiness is on you. Be authentic, make hard choices for long-term benefit, build good systems, save yourself.
And finally,
Find your own meaning and live by your values. Focus on the present moment because that's all there truly is.
that's a powerful synthesis. So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Take a look at the shoulds currently driving your life. Are they things you genuinely value? Or are they external pressures, status games perhaps? Do they align with your authentic path towards wealth and happiness as you define them? And maybe more concretely, what's one small, hard choice, one tiny habit you could start today to begin building that better future for yourself based on these principles?
That's the real deep dive applying it.